Sign here, Mr. Richardson, and the Grand Crest Hotel officially transfers to Amara Jones Hospitality Group. The man across from me stared at the contract like it might burst into flames. His hands shook as he reached for the pen. 5 years ago, those same hands had pointed at me while he screamed about knowing my place. Today, they trembled as he signed away his life's work to the woman he'd thrown out like garbage. You know what they say about karma, it doesn't rush, but it never forgets. Sometimes justice takes its sweet time, but when it arrives, it's wearing designer shoes and carrying a checkbook that could buy your entire world twice over. Hey everyone, hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're watching from. The weather here in Chicago is beautiful, but nothing compared to how bright this moment feels. My name is Amara Jones, and this is the story of how I went from scrubbing floors in a hotel lobby to owning the entire building. From being fired for having the audacity to defend my dignity, to watching my former boss sign papers that made me his new boss. If you stick around for this story, I promise you'll see exactly how a woman with nothing but determination can flip an entire script. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me about a time someone underestimated you. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this plays out. But let me start from the beginning, because the woman sitting in this boardroom today is nothing like the girl who walked into the Grand Crest 5 years ago. I was 23 when I first put on that burgundy vest and black slacks that made up our uniform. Fresh out of community college with a degree in business management that everyone told me was worthless without connections. My mother had cleaned office buildings her entire life, working double shifts just to keep me in school. She used to say education was the one thing nobody could take away from you. She was wrong about that, but she was right about everything else. The Grand Crest Hotel was supposed to be my stepping stone. Not the destination, just a place to gain experience in hospitality while I figured out my next move. 50 floors of marble and crystal, the kind of place where movie stars stayed when they came to town. I thought working there would teach me how luxury really operated, give me insights I could use later. I believed in fairness back then. I believed that if you worked hard, showed up early, stayed late, and treated every guest like royalty, management would notice. I believed that respect was something you could earn through dedication. I had this naive faith that the world rewarded good people who did good work. The other servers warned me about Mr. Richardson from day one. Marcus Richardson, the CEO who inherited the hotel from his father and ran it like his personal kingdom. They told me he had favorites and targets, that he could make your life beautiful or miserable depending on his mood. But I figured if I kept my head down and did excellent work, I'd be fine. For 8 months, I was the model employee. I memorized every guest preference, learned wine pairings, studied the hotel's history so I could answer any question. I picked up extra shifts when people called in sick. I never complained when they scheduled me for back-to-back doubles during convention season. The guests loved me. I had more positive comment cards than anyone else on staff. Families requested me specifically when they returned. Business travelers would ask for my section because they knew their coffee would never be empty and their needs would be anticipated before they voiced them. But Marcus Richardson noticed me for all the wrong reasons. It started small. Comments about my hair when I wore it natural instead of straightened. Questions about whether I really belonged in the fine dining section or if I'd be more comfortable in the coffee shop downstairs. Little remarks about urban backgrounds and proper customer service that made the other staff look away uncomfortably. I told myself he was testing me, that if I proved myself consistently professional, he'd eventually see my value. I documented everything, thinking that eventually, someone higher up would review his behavior and set things right. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in October. I remember because it was the day that changed everything about how I understood power, respect, and what it really takes to protect yourself in this world. A guest had complained about cold food, which wasn't even from my section, but Marcus called me into his office anyway. He stood behind his massive desk, looking down at me like I was something he'd scrape off his shoe. The conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes taught me more about reality than my entire education had. He told me I was getting too comfortable, forgetting my place, acting like I belonged somewhere I didn't. He said the other staff had complained about my attitude, which was a lie, and that guests had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around me, which was another lie. Then he said something that burned itself into my memory so completely that I can still hear every word in his exact tone. What happened next wasn't just the end of my job. It was the death of my faith in fairness and the birth of something much more powerful. Because that Tuesday in October was the day I learned that sometimes the only way to get justice is to build it yourself. And building it myself is exactly what I did. That Tuesday started like any other day, but I should have known something was different when Marcus actually smiled at me during the morning staff meeting. Not his usual cold acknowledgement, but an actual smile that reached his eyes. I was naive enough to think it meant progress. Let me tell you about the months leading up to that moment, because understanding who I was then makes what happened next even more devastating. My mother, Linda Jones, raised me in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago. She cleaned office buildings downtown from midnight to 8 in the morning, then came home to get me ready for school. I never saw her complain, never heard her say the work was beneath her. She taught me that honest work had dignity, regardless of what other people thought. When I graduated high school, she worked extra jobs to help pay for community college. I studied business management because I wanted to create something that would make her sacrifices worthwhile. My dream was to open a small restaurant, maybe grow it into a chain. Nothing fancy, just good food and fair treatment for employees. I wanted to build the kind of workplace my mother deserved, but never found. The Grand Crest seemed like the perfect training ground. I could learn fine dining, understand luxury service, and study how successful hospitality businesses operated. I walked into that job interview convinced that my education and enthusiasm would speak for themselves. The hiring manager, Susan Chin, was actually encouraging. She reviewed my resume, asked thoughtful questions about my goals, and seemed impressed by my knowledge of hospitality principles. She told me the Grand Crest valued employees who showed initiative and professional growth. I left that interview believing I'd found a company that would invest in my development. My first week, I met the core team that would become my daily reality. There was Jennifer, a server who'd been there for years and knew every shortcut and guest preference. She took me under her wing, teaching me the unwritten rules about which managers to avoid and which guests tipped well. Then there was Carlos, the head bartender who made the most incredible cocktails and always shared his tips about reading customer moods. And there was Diana, the assistant manager who seemed to genuinely care about staff development. She scheduled me for training shifts with the best servers, gave me feedback that actually helped me improve, and encouraged me to take on additional responsibilities. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was working somewhere that valued growth over politics. Marcus Richardson seemed like a distant figure during those early weeks. He'd walk through the dining room occasionally, observing service with what looked like professional interest. He never spoke directly to me, but I noticed him watching. I interpreted his attention as positive interest in a promising new employee. The other staff had mixed reactions when they talked about him. Some, particularly the longer-term white employees, spoke about him with respect and even affection. They mentioned his family legacy, how his father built the hotel from nothing, how Marcus was continuing that tradition. Others, particularly the Black and Latino staff, were more cautious in their comments. They'd change the subject when his name came up, or offer vague warnings about staying professional and not getting too comfortable. I dismissed their caution as workplace politics. Every job had personalities and dynamics to navigate. I figured if I focused on excellent service and professional behavior, I'd earn respect from everyone, including Marcus. My breakthrough moment came during a particularly busy Friday night. We were hosting a corporate event for 300 guests, and 2 servers called in sick. The remaining staff was overwhelmed, and service was falling behind. I volunteered to cover an extra section, even though I was already assigned to the main dining room. That night, I served 7 tables simultaneously, kept track of dietary restrictions for a dozen guests, and somehow managed to ensure everyone received their meals on time and properly prepared. The event coordinator specifically complimented my service, and several guests asked for my name to include in their feedback. Marcus witnessed the entire evening. I saw him taking notes, watching how I managed the chaos, observing my interactions with guests and other staff. When the event ended, he approached me directly for the first time. "Impressive work tonight, Amara," he said, using my name for the first time. That kind of initiative is exactly what we need here. I felt like I was glowing. Finally, my hard work was being recognized by the person who mattered most. This was the validation I'd been working toward, proof that merit and dedication could overcome any obstacles. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began including me in conversations about service improvements. He'd ask my opinion about guest feedback, invite me to share observations about operational efficiency. Diana told me privately that he'd never shown that level of interest in a new employee before. I started believing I was special. Not because of favoritism or politics, but because I'd proven myself through performance. I thought Marcus was mentoring me, preparing me for advancement within the company. When he suggested I cross-train in different departments to broaden my understanding of hotel operations, I was thrilled. The catering department taught me event planning and large-scale food service. The front desk rotation showed me guest relations and booking systems. I spent time with housekeeping, learning about property maintenance and guest satisfaction from behind the scenes. Every department head praised my curiosity and work ethic. But during those cross-training weeks, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. The way Marcus spoke differently to white employees versus employees of color. How his praise for my work always came with subtle reminders about gratitude and knowing my place. The fact that other promising Black employees had mysteriously stopped advancing after reaching a certain level. One afternoon, while organizing files in the administrative office, I overheard a conversation between Marcus and his assistant about staffing decisions. They were discussing promoting someone to assistant manager, and my name came up. But not in the way I expected. "She's useful in her current role," Marcus said. "Good worker, knows her place. But management requires a different type of person. Someone who represents our brand appropriately." His assistant mentioned my education and performance reviews, but Marcus cut her off. "Education doesn't change background. We need to be realistic about who belongs where." I stood frozen behind that filing cabinet, understanding for the first time that my merit and dedication meant nothing. All my cross-training, all those conversations about my potential, all his interest in my opinions, it was never about advancement. It was about making me feel valued while keeping me exactly where he thought I belonged. But the real betrayal was still coming. Because what I overheard that day was just Marcus being honest about his limitations. What happened next was him being deliberately cruel. The following Tuesday, everything changed. A guest in the main dining room, an elderly white woman, complained that her soup was cold. The problem was I hadn't served her. Jennifer had that table. But when Marcus stormed into the service area looking for someone to blame, he pointed directly at me. "Office. Now," he said, loud enough for the entire staff to hear. I followed him, genuinely confused about why I was being singled out for someone else's mistake. I thought we'd clarify the situation, maybe discuss better communication between kitchen and service staff. I still believed in reasonable solutions and fair treatment. Marcus closed his office door and turned to face me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not disappointment or frustration, but something much colder. Something that made my stomach drop before he even spoke. "We need to talk about your attitude problem, Amara." That was the moment I realized everything I'd believed about fairness, merit, and earning respect was about to be shattered. And the man I'd trusted to recognize my value was about to show me exactly what he thought I was worth. "Your attitude problem," Marcus repeated, settling behind his desk like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "Sit down." I remained standing. Something about his tone made every instinct tell me not to make myself smaller in that moment. I'm sorry, but I'm confused. The complaint was about table 12, and that's Jennifer's section. I haven't even interacted with that guest. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, and that cold smile spread across his face again. This isn't about one complaint, Amara. This is about a pattern of behavior that's been building for months. My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. What pattern? My performance reviews have been excellent. I've received more positive guest feedback than anyone else on the team. That's exactly the problem. He opened a folder on his desk, though I noticed he didn't actually look at anything inside it. You've gotten comfortable. Too comfortable. Acting like your management material, inserting yourself into conversations above your pay grade, making suggestions like you have authority here. The words hit me like physical blows. Every conversation we'd had, every time he'd asked for my input, every moment I'd thought he was mentoring me, he'd actually been gathering evidence of my supposed overreach. You asked for my opinions, I said quietly. You told me my initiative was exactly what this place needed. I was being polite, he said, and the casual cruelty in his voice made my legs weak. But politeness apparently gave you the wrong impression about your position here. I felt something fundamental shifting inside my chest. All those months of believing I was building toward something, all those late nights studying wine lists and memorizing guest preferences, all those times I defended this place to friends who warned me about corporate hospitality. Everything I'd invested in this job, in this belief system, was crumbling in real time. My position is as a server, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. And I'm excellent at it. Ask any guest I've served. Ask any coworker. Marcus stood up, walked around his desk, and leaned against it, crossing his arms. The physical positioning was deliberate, designed to make me feel surrounded and small. Your coworkers have actually expressed concerns about your behavior. The way you act like you're better than them, like this job is beneath you. That was a lie, and we both knew it. Jennifer had become one of my closest friends. Carlos regularly told other staff to follow my example with difficult guests. Diana had been encouraging me to apply for supervisor positions. But Marcus delivered the lie with such conviction that for a moment, I questioned my own memory. That's not true, I said. Who said that? I'd like to address these concerns directly. That's not how this works, Marcus said. You don't get to interrogate your supervisors or demand explanations. That attitude right there is exactly what I'm talking about. I stared at him, finally understanding the trap I'd walked into. Every question I asked, every attempt to defend myself, every moment of standing up straight instead of apologizing would be used as evidence of my bad attitude. He created a scenario where my only acceptable response was complete submission, and even that might not be enough. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to remember where you are and who you're talking to, he said. I want you to understand that this isn't college, where everyone gets participation trophies for showing up. This is the real world, where people earn their places and stay in them. The racial undertones weren't even subtle anymore. College, participation trophies, earning your place, staying where you belong. He was telling me exactly what he thought about my education, my ambition, and my right to expect fair treatment. I've earned my place here, I said. Through my work, my performance, my dedication to this hotel. Marcus laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. You've earned a paycheck. Nothing more. And frankly, that paycheck has been too generous for someone who clearly doesn't appreciate the opportunity she's been given. That's when I realized this conversation was never about my performance or attitude. This was about power and his need to exercise it. This was about putting me back in what he considered my proper place and making sure I never forgot the lesson. But I was done learning his lessons. I appreciate the opportunity one earned through my qualifications and hard work, I said, and I heard my mother's voice in my tone. Strong, dignified, unbroken. And I've more than proven my value to this establishment. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus's casual cruelty transformed into something much more focused and dangerous. He pushed off from his desk and took a step toward me. Your value, he said softly. Your value is determined by me. Your place here exists because I allow it. And right now, I'm questioning whether this establishment needs your particular kind of value. There it was. The threat laid bare. Submit completely or lose everything. Accept his version of my worth or have no worth at all. Let him define my place or have no place. I thought about my mother working double shifts to pay for my education. I thought about my dreams of opening a restaurant where employees were treated with dignity. I thought about every guest who'd thanked me for exceptional service, every coworker who'd asked for my help, every moment I'd felt proud of the work I was doing. And I made a choice that would change everything. No, I said quietly. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Excuse me? No, I repeated, louder this time. I won't apologize for being good at my job. I won't pretend my education doesn't matter. I won't act grateful for being disrespected. And I won't let you rewrite the story of my performance here to justify whatever decision you've already made. The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Marcus's face went through several expressions before settling on cold fury. You're fired, he said. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Even though I'd seen it coming, the words still hit me like a physical blow. 8 months of my life gone. My income gone. My faith in working within the system shattered. But something else was born in that moment. Something harder and more determined than anything I'd ever felt before. As Marcus reached for his phone to call security, as I realized I was about to be humiliated in front of my coworkers and guests, I made a promise to myself. This would never happen to me again. Never. I would never again put my future in someone else's hands. Never again trust that fairness would prevail without me fighting for it. Never again believe that being excellent at my job would be enough to protect me from people who'd already decided what I was worth. Marcus was about to take my job, my immediate security, and my trust in justice. But he was also about to give me something much more valuable, though he'd never understand what he'd done. He was about to give me the rage and clarity I'd need to build something he could never take away. Security was already walking toward the office. In about 30 seconds, I'd be escorted through the lobby where I'd worked so hard, past the coworkers who'd become my friends, in front of the guests I'd served with pride. But as I stood there, waiting for that final humiliation, I wasn't thinking about what I was losing. I was thinking about what I was going to build. The security guard who escorted me out was actually apologetic. Kevin, I think his name was. He'd seen me work, knew I wasn't the problem employee Marcus had painted me as. But he had a job to protect, just like I'd thought I did an hour earlier. I'm sorry about this, Amara, he said quietly as we walked through the lobby. This doesn't seem right. Every guest and employee in that marble-lined space watched me leave. Some looked confused, others embarrassed, a few actually angry on my behalf. Jennifer caught my eye from across the dining room and mouthed, "Call me," before looking away quickly. Even in my humiliation, I felt grateful for that small gesture of loyalty. But gratitude couldn't pay rent. I had $800 in my checking account and $1,400 in savings. My rent was $1,200 a month. Without unemployment benefits, which would take weeks to process if I qualified at all, I had maybe 6 weeks before complete financial collapse. The job search started the next morning. I applied to every restaurant, hotel, and catering company in Chicago. My resume looked strong on paper, but the employment gap questions came up in every interview. When I explained what happened at the Grand Crest, responses ranged from uncomfortable silence to barely concealed doubt about my version of events. 3 weeks in, I finally got an offer from a chain restaurant in the suburbs. The pay was 60% of what I'd been making, with no benefits and a 2-hour commute each way. I took it because I had no choice, but the numbers didn't work. After transportation costs and taxes, I was barely covering basic expenses. My mother knew I was struggling, though I tried to hide it. Linda Jones could read financial stress on my face like a map she'd studied her whole life. She started bringing me groceries, claiming she'd accidentally bought too much. She offered to help with rent, money I knew came from the small emergency fund she'd spent years building. "Baby, this is temporary," she said one evening while helping me sort through bills. "You're too smart and too determined for this to be your story." I wanted to believe her. But 3 months after leaving the Grand Crest, I was working double shifts at a restaurant where the manager treated me like an interchangeable part, living paycheck to paycheck and watching my dreams of business ownership disappear into practical survival. That's when the idea hit me. I was working a catering event for the restaurant, watching guests pick at overpriced, mediocre food, when I realized I could cook better than what they were serving. Not just better, but with more creativity, more attention to dietary needs, more personal touch. The event coordinator was charging premium prices for what looked like cafeteria food with fancy plating. I started researching catering licenses and commercial kitchen requirements. The startup costs were enormous. Commercial insurance, health department permits, professional equipment, marketing materials. I needed at least $15,000 to launch properly, and I had less than $300 in savings. But I also had something more valuable than money. I had rage that had crystallized into pure determination, and a mother who'd taught me that impossible just meant you hadn't figured out the path yet. I started small. Ridiculously small. I offered to cater birthday parties and small gatherings for friends, cooking in my apartment kitchen and charging barely above cost. Word spread slowly through my network, mostly through my mother's church and my former classmates who remembered my cooking from college potlucks. The first real test came when Jennifer from the Grand Crest reached out. She was planning her engagement party and asked if I'd cater it. 50 people, nothing too fancy, but more than I'd ever attempted on my own. "I trust you," she said over coffee. "And honestly, after what Marcus did to you, I want to support your business." I spent weeks planning that menu, testing recipes, calculating costs down to the penny. I borrowed serving dishes from my mother, rented tables from a church supply company, and worked 16-hour days for 3 days straight preparing everything. The party was perfect. Guests couldn't stop talking about the food. Jennifer's future in-laws asked for my contact information. I got 3 more bookings that night, each one larger than anything I'd done before. For the first time since leaving the Grand Crest, I felt hope rising in my chest. Maybe I could actually build something real. Then my mother had her accident. She fell down the stairs at one of her office buildings, slipped on a wet floor that hadn't been properly marked. 3 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and a concussion that kept her out of work for 2 months. Workers' compensation covered some medical expenses, but not her lost wages, and definitely not the additional care she needed during recovery. Suddenly, I wasn't just supporting myself on catering income that barely covered my basic expenses. I was covering her rent, her medical bills, her grocery costs. Every dollar I'd planned to reinvest in business growth went to keeping us both afloat. I took on more restaurant shifts, working days at the chain place and catering events on weekends. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, ran on coffee and determination, and watched my catering business stagnate because I couldn't afford to grow it or give it the attention it deserved. The breaking point came 6 months later. I'd been building a client base, getting referrals, slowly expanding my menu and capabilities. I had a waiting list of potential customers and dreams of renting commercial kitchen space within the year. Then Marcus Richardson struck again. I found out through Jennifer, who heard it from Diana, who overheard it in a manager's meeting. Marcus had been asking questions about local catering companies, specifically about new businesses that might be undercutting established vendors. Someone had mentioned my growing reputation, and my name had come up. Within 2 weeks, 3 of my best clients canceled their upcoming events. All cited budget concerns, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. When I pressed for details, I learned that someone had contacted them with questions about my business license, my insurance coverage, and whether I had proper permits for the level of catering I was providing. All legitimate questions that any client had the right to ask. All technical requirements that I was still building toward but hadn't fully completed yet. All pressure points that someone with industry knowledge would know how to exploit. Marcus wasn't content with firing me. He was actively working to destroy the business I was building from nothing. I lost $8,000 in canceled contracts that month. Money I'd already spent on deposits for ingredients, equipment rentals, and additional help. I had to take out a credit card cash advance to cover the losses, starting a debt spiral that made business expansion even more impossible. My mother, still recovering and unable to work full shifts, watched me come home defeated night after night. She'd try to encourage me, remind me that every successful person faced obstacles, insist that I was stronger than whatever Marcus could throw at me. But I was drowning. Working 70-hour weeks between the restaurant job and whatever catering work I could salvage, barely keeping both of us housed and fed, watching my business dreams die slowly from financial suffocation and targeted sabotage. One night, sitting at my kitchen table with bills spread around me like evidence of my failures, I seriously considered giving up. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I was reaching above my station, trying to build something I didn't have the background or resources to sustain. Maybe I should accept a stable job somewhere he couldn't touch me and let my entrepreneurial dreams die quietly. That's when my mother sat down across from me with a cup of tea and a look I recognized from childhood. The look that meant she was about to remind me who raised me and what that meant about what I was capable of. "Baby," she said softly, "do you remember what I told you when you were 8 and that teacher said you weren't smart enough for the advanced reading group?" I remembered. She'd marched into that school and demanded they test me properly, then enrolled me in summer programs when the school system failed me. She'd never accepted other people's limitations on my potential. "You told me that sometimes the world tries to make us smaller to make other people more comfortable," I said. "That's right." "And what did we do about it?" "We proved them wrong. Every single time." She reached across the table and took my hands. "Marcus Richardson is scared of you, baby. He wouldn't be working this hard to destroy something that wasn't a real threat to him." She was right. His continued attacks weren't about a fired waitress trying to start a small catering business. They were about a woman with vision and capability who refused to accept his definition of her worth. He could see what I was building toward, even when I couldn't. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of scaling back to avoid his attention, I was going to scale up beyond his reach. Instead of building a small catering business he could undermine through local pressure, I was going to create something so big and so successful that his influence couldn't touch it. I didn't know how yet. I didn't have the money, the connections, or the resources. But I had learned something valuable from watching Marcus operate. I understood how power really worked, how successful people protected their interests, and how to turn someone's strengths against them. Marcus had taught me that playing fair was a luxury I couldn't afford. Now I was going to use that lesson in ways he never intended. The war was just beginning, and I was finally ready to fight it on my terms. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 18 months after Marcus had fired me. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tuesdays had become the days when my life fell apart. I stared at the legal document taped to my apartment door, the words blurring as I tried to process what I was reading. 30 days to vacate. Non-payment of rent. The amount owed was accurate, painfully so. I was 3 months behind, and my landlord had finally run out of patience. My mother was inside, still recovering from a second fall that had set back her healing and cost us another month of her income. Her medical bills had eaten through what little savings I'd managed to rebuild. The catering business existed only on paper now, killed by Marcus's campaign of sabotage and my complete inability to invest in proper growth. I slumped against the door, feeling the weight of complete failure pressing down on my chest. 2 years of fighting, and this is where it had led. Homelessness. My mother sleeping on someone's couch because her daughter couldn't keep a roof over their heads. That's when my phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. I was tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of putting on a brave face when my entire world was collapsing. Amara, thank God you picked up, Jennifer said, her voice tight with urgency. Can you meet me somewhere private? Like, right now? I have something you need to see. 20 minutes later, we sat in her car in an empty parking lot, and Jennifer handed me a manila folder with hands that were actually shaking. I shouldn't be showing you this, she said. I could lose my job. But after everything Marcus did to you, after watching him destroy your business. She stopped, took a breath. He's not who he thought he was, Amara. None of us knew. I opened the folder and the first document made my stomach drop. Financial records from the Grand Crest's corporate accounts showing massive losses over the past 2 years. Revenue down 30%, occupancy rates plummeting, vendor payments consistently late. How did you get these? I asked. Diana's been documenting everything. She applied for a controller position at another hotel, and during her background preparation, she started reviewing our books more carefully. What she found. Jennifer shook her head. Marcus has been cooking the numbers for years. The second document was worse. A forensic accounting report that Diana had commissioned privately, showing systematic financial mismanagement, inflated expense reports, and what appeared to be embezzlement of hotel funds. Marcus had been using company credit lines for personal expenses, falsifying vendor contracts, and hiding losses through creative bookkeeping. The hotel is broke, Jennifer said quietly. Not struggling, not having a bad year. Broke. They haven't paid their insurance premiums in 4 months. Half the vendors are demanding cash on delivery. The staff health insurance was canceled last week, but nobody's been told yet. I stared at the numbers, trying to process what I was seeing. The man who'd fired me for having an attitude problem had been systematically looting his own family's business. While he was lecturing me about knowing my place and earning my value, he was stealing from every employee who trusted him. There's more, Jennifer said, pulling out another set of documents. Diana found correspondence with potential buyers. Marcus has been trying to sell the hotel for 8 months, but everyone who does due diligence walks away once they see the real financial picture. The buyer inquiries were from major hotel chains, investment groups, and hospitality management companies. Every single one had made initial offers, then withdrawn after their accountants reviewed the books. The Grand Crest, which Marcus treated like his personal kingdom, was unsellable in its current condition. He's desperate, Jennifer continued. Diana heard him on a conference call yesterday with his lawyers. If he can't find a buyer or a massive cash infusion in the next 6 months, the hotel goes into bankruptcy. Everything gets liquidated to pay creditors. I sat in that car, holding evidence of Marcus Richardson's complete financial incompetence, and felt something shift in my chest. Not hope exactly, but a kind of cold clarity I'd never experienced before. The man who'd destroyed my life was destroying his own business through sheer greed and stupidity. While I'd been building a catering company from nothing, working 18-hour days and living on savings, he'd been stealing from his own employees and running a luxury hotel into the ground. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Jennifer looked uncomfortable. Because Diana thinks you should know. Because what he did to you is criminal, and this proves he's been lying about everything. His success, his business acumen, his right to judge anyone else's worth. She was right, but that wasn't the real reason this information mattered. This wasn't just vindication, though God knows I needed that. This was opportunity disguised as devastation. Jennifer, I said slowly, how much do you think the hotel would sell for in its current condition? She consulted the documents. According to these buyer inquiries, maybe 40% of its assessed value. The building and location are still valuable, but any buyer would have to assume massive debt and spend millions on renovations and staff restructuring. 40% of assessed value. Still an enormous amount of money, far beyond anything I could imagine accessing. But not impossible. Not if I understood how business acquisitions really worked, how debt could be leveraged, how partnerships could be structured. I thought about everything I'd learned during my cross-training at the Grand Crust. How the different departments operated, where inefficiencies created waste, which vendor relationships were actually profitable. I'd seen the hotel from the inside in ways Marcus never had, because he'd never worked a day of actual service in his life. There's something else, Jennifer said quietly. Diana's planning to quit. She can't be part of what's happening anymore, especially now that she knows employees aren't even going to have health insurance. She's documenting everything before she leaves, building a case for wrongful termination lawsuits and probably criminal charges. When? 2 weeks. She's already accepted another position. Jennifer hesitated. She wanted me to ask if you'd be interested in the evidence file she's compiled. Everything she's gathered about Marcus's financial crimes, the employment law violations, the vendor fraud. She thinks you might have legal grounds for a lawsuit over your firing, especially with this context. A lawsuit. Months or years of legal proceedings, fighting for compensation from a man who'd already stolen everything of value from his own business. Even if I won, there might not be anything left to collect by the time the case resolved. But the information itself was priceless. Complete financial records, vendor relationships, employee documentation, operational procedures. Everything I'd need to understand exactly how badly Marcus had mismanaged the hotel and exactly what it would take to turn it around. Tell Diana I want everything, I said. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence she's compiled. Jennifer looked surprised. Are you planning to sue him? I was planning something much more ambitious than a lawsuit. I was planning to do what Marcus had told me was impossible. I was planning to take his place. But first, I had to survive the next 30 days. I had to find a way to keep my mother and myself housed while I figured out how to turn this information into the foundation of something bigger than Marcus could imagine. I looked at the eviction notice again, and instead of seeing my failure, I saw a timeline. 30 days to transform complete devastation into the first step of a plan that would take everything Marcus valued and make it mine. He'd fired me for having an attitude problem. He was about to discover what a real attitude problem looked like. But that night, sitting in my empty apartment with my mother sleeping fitfully on the couch, the weight of our situation hit me fully for the first time. I had information now and the beginnings of a plan, but I also had $14 in my checking account and nowhere to live in 4 weeks. My mother woke up around midnight and found me crying over the kitchen table covered with financial documents and legal papers. She didn't ask for explanations. She just sat down beside me and held my hand while I told her everything. The eviction, Marcus's financial crimes, Diana's evidence, and the impossible dream that was starting to form in my mind. Baby, she said when I finished, I've watched you fight for 2 years. I've seen you build something from nothing, survive sabotage, and refuse to give up when anyone else would have quit. But I've never seen you with this look in your eyes before. What look? Like you finally understand what you're really fighting for. She was right. For 2 years, I'd been fighting to survive, to rebuild, to prove Marcus wrong. But survival wasn't enough anymore. I wasn't just going to prove him wrong. I was going to take everything he thought belonged to him and show him what real business leadership looked like. I was going to buy his hotel and fire him from his own empire. The only question was how a broke woman with an eviction notice was going to acquire the capital to purchase a $40 million property from a man who'd spent years trying to destroy her. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I knew exactly where to start. The eviction happened on a Thursday morning in November. I'd managed to negotiate an extra week with the landlord, but even that small mercy had run out. 2 sheriff's deputies stood outside while a moving crew removed our belongings, placing everything we owned on the sidewalk under a gray sky that threatened snow. My mother sat in her wheelchair, watching strangers handle her few precious possessions. The second fall had damaged her spine more severely than anyone initially realized. What we'd thought was temporary recovery had become permanent disability. She could walk short distances with a walker, but any real mobility required the wheelchair we'd had to buy with money I didn't have. "Where are we supposed to go?" she asked quietly, not really expecting an answer. I didn't have one. The homeless shelter had a 2-week maximum stay and a waiting list 3 months long. My credit was destroyed from missed payments and cash advances. No landlord would approve me for a new apartment, even if I could scrape together first month's rent and security deposit. Jennifer had offered her couch for a few days, but she lived in a studio apartment barely big enough for one person. Carlos from the Grand Crest had mentioned a friend who might have temporary work, but it was manual labor that would pay maybe $200 a week if I was lucky. I stood on that sidewalk, watching our life reduced to boxes and garbage bags, and felt something inside me break in a way I'd never experienced before. Not anger this time, or determination, or even despair. Just a hollow emptiness where my fight used to be. The medical bills from my mother's accidents had consumed every penny I'd managed to save from catering work. The equipment I'd bought for the business had been sold months earlier to keep us housed for one more month. Diana's evidence about Marcus's financial crime sat in a storage unit I could no longer afford to pay for, containing information that might as well have been written in a foreign language for all the good it could do me now. We ended up in a motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions about credit checks. $300 for 7 days in a room with a broken heater, stained carpets, and neighbors who conducted business I tried not to think about. My mother developed pneumonia that first week. The stress of the move, the cold room, the dampness that seemed to seep through the walls, it all combined to attack her already weakened immune system. I spent my last $80 on medications the emergency room doctor prescribed, then had to choose between her antibiotics and enough food to last until I could find more work. I chose the medicine. We lived on vending machine crackers and whatever free samples I could collect from grocery stores for 3 days. By the second week, my mother was sleeping 18 hours a day, and I was working 18 hours a day at whatever jobs I could find. Cleaning offices at night, serving coffee at a downtown cafe in the morning, doing delivery runs for a catering company that paid cash under the table. Every dollar went to keeping us in that miserable room for another few days. I lost 15 pounds in a month. My hair started falling out from stress and malnutrition. I developed a persistent cough that I couldn't afford to have checked by a doctor. When I looked in mirrors, I saw a stranger. Hollow-eyed, hollow-cheeked, wearing clothes that hung loose on a frame that had once carried itself with confidence and hope. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in December. Of course it was a Tuesday. I returned to the motel after a 16-hour day to find my mother unconscious on the bathroom floor. She'd fallen trying to get to the toilet and hit her head on the edge of the bathtub. Blood pooled under her hair, and she wasn't responding to my voice. The ambulance ride cost money I didn't have. The emergency room bills would destroy what was left of my credit. But watching the paramedics work on my mother, seeing how fragile she looked on that gurney, I realized I'd been fighting the wrong battle. For 2 years, I'd been trying to prove Marcus wrong, trying to build something that would show him my worth. But my mother was dying slowly in a moldy motel room because I'd been too proud to accept that some fights couldn't be won. Too stubborn to admit that dreams didn't pay medical bills or keep roofs over heads. The doctor at the hospital was kind but direct. My mother needed constant care, proper medications, and living conditions that wouldn't compromise her healing. None of which I could provide while working multiple minimum wage jobs and living in temporary housing. There are assisted living facilities that accept Medicaid, she said gently. Your mother would have professional care, social interaction, activities to keep her engaged. It might be better for both of you. Better for both of us meant admitting I'd failed completely. It meant accepting that I couldn't take care of the woman who'd sacrificed everything for my education and dreams. It meant giving up the last person who believed in my potential and placing her in an institution because I couldn't earn enough money to keep us together. I sat in that hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning, filling out paperwork for Medicaid applications and assisted living evaluations, and felt my soul crack in half. Every form was a confession of inadequacy. Every signature was an acknowledgement that Marcus had won. He'd fired me for having an attitude problem, and now I was about to surrender the only family I had because I couldn't afford to keep her safe. He destroyed my business, and now I was working multiple jobs that barely kept me housed in a room that was making her sicker. He told me to know my place, and apparently my place was exactly where he'd put me. Broke, alone, and grateful for whatever scraps I could find. The social worker who reviewed my mother's case was professional but clear about the reality. The waiting list for decent facilities was 6 months long. The places with immediate openings were understaffed, underfunded, and had reputations that made my stomach turn. But my mother needed care immediately, and I had no other options. "I need you to understand," the social worker said, "that once your mother is placed in a facility, visiting will be limited. Most of our clients find it's easier to adjust if family contact is gradual and structured." Limited visiting. Gradual contact. They were telling me I was about to lose daily access to the only person who'd never stopped believing in me. The woman who'd worked double shifts to pay for my education would spend her final years in a place where I could see her twice a week for an hour at a time. I signed the papers because I had no choice. I scheduled the intake evaluation because the alternative was watching her die in a motel room. I made arrangements to place my mother in the care of strangers because I'd failed to build anything strong enough to protect her. That night, back in our freezing room, I sat beside my mother's bed while she slept fitfully, hooked to a portable oxygen machine the hospital had sent home with us. She looked so small under the thin blankets, so fragile and tired. The strong woman who'd raised me to believe I could accomplish anything had been reduced to this, because I'd been too naive to understand how power really worked. I pulled out my phone and looked at the contact information Diana had given me for her new job. For weeks, I'd been telling myself I was going to use her evidence to build a case against Marcus, maybe even find a way to acquire the Grand Crest. But sitting in that cold room, watching my mother struggle to breathe, those plans felt like fantasies from someone else's life. Maybe it was time to stop fighting battles I couldn't win. Maybe it was time to accept a stable job at Diana's new hotel, put aside my entrepreneurial dreams, and focus on earning enough money to eventually move my mother to a better facility. Maybe Marcus had been right all along. Maybe I didn't know my place, and maybe my place wasn't anywhere near the level of success I'd been reaching for. I was about to delete Diana's number and let go of the last thread connecting me to my old dreams when my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Amara Jones? I got your number from someone who used to work at the Grand Crest. I'm looking for someone with hotel operations experience for a business opportunity. Could we meet?" I stared at that message for 10 minutes, trying to decide if it was spam, a scam, or some kind of cruel joke. Who would be reaching out to me at 11:30 at night about a business opportunity? How did they even know I existed? But as I sat there in that miserable room, listening to my mother's labored breathing and facing the reality of placing her in a facility I could barely afford to visit, I realized I had absolutely nothing left to lose. The worst that could happen was this mysterious contact would waste an hour of my time. The best that could happen was something I couldn't even imagine yet. I typed back, "Yes, this is Amara. I'm interested. When and where?" Because sometimes, when you're at the absolute bottom of everything you thought was possible, the only direction left is up. And sometimes, the universe sends exactly the lifeline you need right when you've given up believing in lifelines. I just had to be brave enough to grab it. The coffee shop where we met the next morning was nothing special. A chain place near the hospital where I'd spent most of the previous night with my mother. I arrived 20 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly because I had nowhere else to be. The woman who walked in at exactly 9 o'clock wasn't what I'd expected. Mid-50s, wearing a simple black coat and carrying a leather portfolio that looked expensive but not flashy. She scanned the room, made eye contact with me, and approached with the kind of confident stride I remembered having once. "Amara Jones?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria Chen. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." "Chen." The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. She ordered coffee for both of us and chose a table in the back corner, away from other customers. Everything about her manner suggested this was a business meeting, not a casual conversation. "I'll get straight to the point," Victoria said, opening her portfolio. "I represent a consortium of investors who specialize in hospitality acquisitions. We focus on properties with strong fundamentals but poor management, usually family-owned businesses that have lost their way." She pulled out a photograph that made my stomach drop. The Grand Crest Hotel, taken from the street view that showed the main entrance where I'd been escorted out 2 years ago. "We've been watching this property for 18 months, she continued. "The location is prime, the building has good bones, and the brand recognition is strong. But the financial management has been catastrophic. The current owner has essentially destroyed what his father built." I stared at the photograph, trying to process what she was telling me. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because we need someone who understands that specific property from the inside. Someone who knows the operational challenges, the staff dynamics, the guest expectations. Someone who's seen firsthand what works and what doesn't." Victoria pulled out another document, and I recognized Diana's handwriting immediately. It was a summary of the evidence Diana had compiled about Marcus's financial crimes, but formatted like a business analysis rather than a legal filing. "Your friend Diana Chin is my niece," Victoria said, watching my reaction. "She's been keeping me informed about the situation at the Grand Crest for over a year. When she told me about your background, your work ethic, and what happened to you there, I became very interested in meeting you." Diana's aunt. A hospitality investor who'd been watching Marcus destroy his own business while I struggled to survive his sabotage. I felt like I was in some kind of dream where random pieces of my life were suddenly connecting in ways that made no sense. "I still don't understand what you want from me," I said. Victoria leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. "I want you to help us acquire the Grand Crest Hotel, but not as a consultant or advisor. As the operational partner who would run the property after acquisition." The words hung in the air between us like something I could almost touch, but didn't dare believe. Run the Grand Crest Hotel. The place where Marcus had told me I didn't belong, where he'd fired me for having too much ambition. She was talking about making me the person in charge. "That's impossible," I said quietly. "I don't have the capital, the experience, or the credentials to run a property like that." "You have something more valuable than any of those things," Victoria said. "You have intimate knowledge of exactly how not to run that hotel. You've seen every mistake Marcus made, every system he corrupted, every relationship he damaged. You know what that property could be if it was managed properly." She pulled out a third document, this one a financial projection that made my head spin. Revenue targets, staffing plans, renovation budgets, marketing strategies. It was a complete business plan for turning the Grand Crest around, and it was more ambitious than anything I'd ever imagined. "Our consortium can provide the capital for acquisition and renovation," Victoria continued. "What we need is someone with vision and operational expertise to lead the transformation. Diana says you're the most naturally gifted hospitality professional she's ever worked with." I thought about Diana, who'd watched me work for 8 months before Marcus fired me. Who'd seen me handle impossible service challenges with grace and creativity. Who'd trusted me enough to share evidence of Marcus's crimes because she believed I deserved justice. "Even if I could do the job," I said, "I'm not exactly in a position to take on new challenges right now. My mother needs care I can't afford, I'm living in a motel, and I haven't had steady income in months." Victoria nodded sympathetically. "Diana told me about your mother's situation. That's actually part of why I wanted to meet you. Someone who prioritizes family loyalty and personal responsibility the way you have makes exactly the kind of partner we're looking for." She pulled out one more document, and this one made my eyes fill with tears before I could stop them. It was a healthcare plan with coverage details for employees and their family members, including long-term care benefits that would cover exactly the kind of facility my mother needed. "If you agreed to partner with us, your mother would have full medical coverage immediately. We could arrange for her care at one of the best assisted living facilities in the city, the kind of place with a 2-year waiting list that could be bypassed for family members of executive partners. I stared at that healthcare document, seeing a solution to the problem that had been destroying me for months. My mother could have professional care, physical therapy, social activities, and medical support that would actually help her heal. And I could visit her every day, be part of her recovery instead of watching helplessly while she declined. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked. Victoria smiled for the first time since sitting down. "We're asking you to come home. To take charge of the property where you belonged all along. To show Marcus Richardson what real leadership looks like." The scope of what she was proposing hit me all at once. Not just a job, but a complete reversal of everything that had happened to me. Not just survival, but triumph. Not just getting back to where I'd been, but rising to a level I'd never dared dream about. The consortium would structure the deal so that you earn equity in the property based on performance metrics, Victoria explained. If you can turn the hotel around within 3 years, you'd own 30% of a property worth significantly more than Marcus paid for it originally. 30% ownership of the Grand Crest Hotel. From fired waitress to partial owner in less than 5 years. From being told I didn't know my place to literally owning the place that had rejected me. But the magnitude of the opportunity also terrified me. What if I failed? What if Diana had oversold my abilities to her aunt? What if I took this chance and proved Marcus right about my limitations? "I can see you're scared," Victoria said gently. "That's good. Anyone who wasn't scared of this level of responsibility probably shouldn't have it." She was right about the fear. But underneath the terror was something else, something I'd almost forgotten existed. Excitement. The kind of electric anticipation I used to feel when facing a new challenge, before Marcus convinced me that my ambitions were unrealistic. "There's one condition," Victoria continued. "Marcus Richardson has to be completely removed from any operational role. We're not interested in reforming him or giving him a chance to redeem himself. This only works if he's gone." The idea of firing Marcus Richardson from his own hotel should have felt like sweet revenge. Instead, it felt like justice. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because he'd proven he was incapable of protecting the employees and guests who depended on that property. "When would this happen?" I asked. "The acquisition is scheduled for 60 days from now, assuming our due diligence confirms what we already know about the financial situation. You'd start immediately with the transition team, learning the investor side of operations while we finalize the purchase. 60 days. 2 months to transform myself from a woman living in a motel to the operational partner of a major hotel acquisition. 2 months to go from victim to victor in the most complete way imaginable." I thought about my mother, sleeping in that cold room, waiting for me to figure out how to arrange her care. I thought about the dreams I'd abandoned, the business plans I'd given up on, the woman I'd been before Marcus convinced me I was reaching too high. And I thought about every night I'd lain awake wondering what would have happened if I'd been born into a family with connections, if I'd had mentors who opened doors instead of slamming them shut, if I'd met Victoria Chen before I'd met Marcus Richardson. "I need to think about this," I said, though I already knew my answer. Victoria handed me her business card and stood to leave. "Take your time. But, Amara, don't let fear make this decision for you. You've already survived the worst thing Marcus could do to you. Everything from here is just building something better." After she left, I sat in that coffee shop for 2 hours, staring at her business card and the healthcare document that could change my mother's life immediately. I thought about every reason this opportunity was too good to be true, every way it could go wrong, every possibility that I was being set up for an even more devastating failure. But I also thought about something my mother had said the night before, during one of her lucid moments between medication doses. "Baby, I didn't work all those years so you could play it safe. I worked so you could take chances I never had." She was right. Playing it safe had gotten me fired, sabotaged, and nearly homeless. Playing it safe had led to exactly the kind of life Marcus thought I deserved. If I was going to fail, I might as well fail while reaching for something extraordinary. I pulled out my phone and dialed Victoria's number. "This is Amara Jones," I said when she answered. "I'm in. When do we start?" The war wasn't over. In some ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time in 2 years, I was fighting on my own terms, with my own army, for stakes that would change everything. Marcus Richardson had no idea what was coming for him. The day of the acquisition, I stood in the Grand Crest's marble lobby at exactly 10 in the morning, wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than I used to make in a month. The transformation over the past 60 days had been remarkable, not just professionally, but personally. Proper nutrition, adequate sleep, and the confidence that comes from knowing your worth had restored the woman Marcus tried to destroy. Victoria's consortium had been thorough in their preparation. I'd spent 8 weeks learning every aspect of luxury hotel management, from revenue optimization to staff development to guest experience design. I'd reviewed financial statements, studied market analysis, and developed operational plans that would turn the Grand Crest into the most profitable property in the city. But more importantly, I'd learned how to wield power the way Victoria did. Quietly, strategically, and with devastating effectiveness. Marcus didn't know about the acquisition yet. The legal paperwork had been handled discreetly, with the consortium purchasing the hotel's debt from various creditors before Marcus realized what was happening. By the time his lawyers understood the situation, the Grand Crest belonged to new owners who had every legal right to terminate his employment immediately. The staff meeting was scheduled for 10:30. Marcus had called it to address what he described as temporary financial challenges and operational adjustments. He had no idea he was about to be publicly fired by the woman he'd humiliated 2 years earlier. I positioned myself near the main staircase, the same spot where I'd stood countless times as a server, watching Marcus deliver condescending speeches about performance standards and company loyalty. Today, I would be delivering a different kind of speech from a very different position. The first staff members began arriving at 10:15. Jennifer saw me immediately and stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with confusion and something that looked like hope. Carlos followed her gaze and whispered something that made other employees turn to stare. "Amara?" Jennifer approached cautiously, as if I might disappear if she moved too quickly. "What are you doing here? You look." She paused, taking in my professional appearance and confident posture. "You look incredible." "I'm here for the meeting," I said, smiling at the bewilderment on her face. "There are some changes happening today that I think you'll appreciate." Diana appeared at the top of the staircase, having returned to collect some personal items she'd left behind when she quit. When she saw me, her face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen from her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the gathering staff, "I'd like you to meet the new operational director of the Grand Crest Hotel." The murmur that went through the crowd was electric. Servers, housekeepers, front desk clerks, and managers all turned to stare at me with expressions ranging from shock to delight to complete disbelief. These were people who'd watched Marcus fire me, who'd seen me struggle and disappear, who'd probably assumed I'd given up on hospitality entirely. Marcus arrived at exactly 10:30, striding through the lobby with his usual arrogance, completely oblivious to the tension in the room. He wore the same expensive suit style he'd always favored, carried himself with the same entitled confidence, and had the same cold expression I remembered from our final confrontation. He stopped when he saw me, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, looking around the room as if someone would explain this unwelcome intrusion. "Security, escort this person out immediately." "Security reports to me now," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly through the marble space. "Along with everyone else in this building." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, trying to process what I'd just said. "That's impossible. This is my hotel. My family built this place." I pulled out a leather portfolio, the same type Victoria had carried to our first meeting, and extracted a document that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about his world. Actually, as of 9 o'clock this morning, this hotel belongs to the Chin Morrison Hospitality Group, I said, handing him the transfer papers. Your employment has been terminated, effective immediately, for gross financial mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. The silence in the lobby was absolute. 60 employees watched Marcus read the legal document that stripped away everything he'd inherited from his father. I could see his hands shaking as he reached the signature lines that made his displacement official. "This is fraud," he said, his voice rising. "You can't just steal someone's business. I'll have you arrested." "The only fraud here was committed by you," I replied, pulling out a second document. Diana's forensic accounting report, now formatted as evidence in a civil case that would be filed within the hour. 2 years of embezzlement, vendor fraud, employee benefit theft, and tax evasion. Your own financial records document every crime. I handed copies of the report to Jennifer and Carlos, knowing they would share the information with the rest of the staff. Everyone deserved to know exactly what Marcus had been doing with their health insurance premiums, their pension contributions, and their overtime payments. "You stole from every person in this room," I continued, my voice carrying the weight of 2 years of suppressed rage and hard-won wisdom. "While you were lecturing me about knowing my place, you were stealing money meant to cover their medical emergencies and their children's futures." Marcus's face had gone pale, but he tried one more desperate attack. "Nobody's going to believe anything you say. You're a failed waitress with a grudge. A nobody who couldn't even keep a job serving coffee." The old Amara would have been devastated by those words. The old Amara would have felt shame and self-doubt creeping in around the edges of her confidence. But the woman standing in that lobby had spent 60 days learning exactly what she was capable of, surrounded by people who valued her intelligence and vision. "You're right about one thing," I said, smiling at him with genuine amusement. "I couldn't keep a job serving coffee. Because I was meant for something much bigger than you ever imagined." I turned to address the entire staff, making sure everyone could hear what came next. "My name is Amara Jones, and I'm your new operational director. Over the next 6 months, we're going to transform this property into the most successful hotel in Chicago. Everyone who is employed here as of today will keep their positions, with immediate restoration of full health benefits and retroactive pay for the overtime you were cheated out of." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Applause, cheers, and more than a few tears from employees who'd been struggling with medical bills and financial stress they'd never understood wasn't their fault. "Furthermore," I continued, "we'll be implementing profit-sharing bonuses, professional development programs, and promotion tracks that reward merit rather than favoritism. This hotel will succeed because we treat our people like the valuable professionals they are." Marcus stood in the middle of that celebration, watching his former employees cheer for the woman he'd tried to destroy. The man who'd told me I didn't belong was being replaced by someone who understood that a hotel's success depended on respecting every person who contributed to the guest experience. "You can't do this," he said, his voice barely audible over the crowd's enthusiasm. "This place will fail without me. You don't understand how to run a business at this level." I walked closer to him, speaking quietly so only he could hear my next words. "Marcus, I spent 8 months watching you mismanage this property while stealing from your own employees. I learned more about leadership from your failures than I ever could have from your success. You've been the perfect example of everything a leader should never be." Security was waiting by the front entrance, not to escort me out this time, but to ensure Marcus left the building without creating further disruption. His personal items had already been packed and would be delivered to his home address. As he walked toward the door, escorted by the same security guard who'd removed me 2 years earlier, Marcus turned back one final time. "This won't last," he called out, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You'll destroy everything my family built." "No," I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to build something your family never could." A business based on respect, integrity, and actual competence. The door closed behind Marcus Richardson, and he was gone from the Grand Crest forever. The man who'd fired me for standing up for my dignity had been fired for failing to understand the most basic principles of business leadership. But the real victory wasn't his departure. It was the faces of 60 employees who finally understood that their struggles weren't their fault, that their worth had never been properly recognized, and that their futures were about to become brighter than they'd dared to hope. Jennifer approached me as the crowd began to disperse, her eyes still bright with unshed tears. "How did you do this?" she asked. 2 years ago, you were evicted from your apartment. 6 months ago, Diana told me you were living in a motel. How did you go from that to this? I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The destruction and rebuilding, the partnerships and betrayals, the moments of despair and the gradual return of hope. The woman who'd been broken by Marcus's cruelty had been rebuilt into someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to people who underestimated her. I learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, I said. Marcus thought he was destroying my life when he fired me. But he was actually freeing me to become someone he could never control. That afternoon, I called my mother from the executive office that had once belonged to Marcus. She was settled in her new assisted living facility, receiving physical therapy and medical care that was already improving her condition dramatically. "How does it feel, baby?" she asked when I told her about the morning's events. "Like justice," I said. "Not revenge, but actual justice. The people who deserve to be protected are safe now. The person who is causing harm can't hurt anyone else." "And how does it feel to be sitting in that office?" I looked around the space that represented everything Marcus had told me I could never achieve. The mahogany desk where he'd signed my termination papers now held documents bearing my signature. The window overlooking the city now framed my view of a future I'd built from the ashes of his cruelty. "It feels like coming home," I said. Because that's exactly what it was. Not just a return to the Grand Crest, but a return to the person I'd always been meant to become. The person who existed before Marcus convinced me to doubt my worth, and who emerged stronger after surviving his attempts to destroy me. The war was over. And this time, the right side had won. 6 months later, I stood in that same marble lobby, but everything about it had changed. The Grand Crest Hotel had just been awarded 5 Diamond status, the highest rating in luxury hospitality. Guest satisfaction scores had increased by 40%, employee retention was at an all-time high, and revenue had exceeded our most optimistic projections. More importantly, the culture had transformed completely. Employees smiled when they came to work instead of looking over their shoulders in fear. Guests noticed the difference immediately, commenting on the genuine warmth and professionalism of our staff. The hotel had become everything I'd envisioned during those long nights planning my future while living in that motel room. The success hadn't gone unnoticed by the hospitality industry. 3 major hotel chains had approached Victoria's consortium about partnership deals. 2 business magazines had featured our turnaround story on their covers. The Grand Crest had become a case study in ethical leadership and employee empowerment. But the real measure of our success was what happened to the people Marcus had mistreated for years. Jennifer had been promoted to assistant general manager, with full authority over front-of-house operations. She'd enrolled in an MBA program that the hotel was funding, preparing for even greater leadership responsibilities. Her confidence had blossomed in ways that reminded me of my own transformation. Carlos now managed our entire beverage program, including a cocktail menu that had won awards from 3 different industry publications. He'd been able to buy a house for his family and pay for his daughter's college tuition with the profit-sharing bonuses we'd implemented. Diana had returned as our director of finance, ensuring that every dollar was tracked with transparency and accountability. Her forensic accounting skills had helped us recover over $200,000 that Marcus had stolen from employee benefit funds. Even Kevin, the security guard who'd apologetically escorted me out 2 years earlier, had been promoted to head of security. He'd personally thanked me for giving him the opportunity to protect employees instead of intimidating them. As for Marcus Richardson, justice had been swift and complete. The criminal investigation Diana had triggered resulted in federal charges for embezzlement, tax fraud, and employee benefit theft. Marcus pled guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of his crimes. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to every employee he'd stolen from. His reputation in the hospitality industry was destroyed. No hotel, restaurant, or tourism company would hire him for any position. The Richardson family name, which his father had built with integrity and hard work, became synonymous with corruption and employee abuse. His personal finances had collapsed along with his business empire. The assets he'd purchased with stolen money were seized to pay restitution. The luxury lifestyle he'd maintained while cheating his workers was gone forever. But perhaps the most fitting consequence was his complete irrelevance. While he sat in prison, the hotel he'd nearly destroyed became more successful than it had ever been under his leadership. Every month that our revenue increased, every award we won, every positive review we received was proof that his presence had been the problem, not the solution. On the 1-year anniversary of the acquisition, I visited my mother at her assisted living facility. The transformation in her health had been remarkable. Physical therapy had restored much of her mobility. The social activities and mental stimulation had brought back her sharp wit and infectious laugh. The quality medical care had addressed health issues that had gone untreated for years. "Look at you," she said as I entered her bright, comfortable apartment. "Every time I see you, you're glowing a little brighter." She was right. The stress lines that had carved themselves into my face during those desperate months had faded. My hair was healthy again. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost, plus the muscle tone that came from having energy for exercise and self-care. But the most important change was internal. The fear that had dominated my thoughts for 2 years was gone, replaced by confidence in my ability to handle whatever challenges arose. I no longer woke up wondering if I could survive the day. I woke up excited about what I could accomplish. "I have news," I told my mother, settling into the chair beside her favorite window. "Victoria's consortium wants to expand. They're looking at 3 more properties in other cities, and they want me to lead the acquisition team." My mother's face lit up with pride. 3 more hotels? 3 more chances to create workplaces where people are valued and respected. 3 more opportunities to show that ethical leadership produces better results than fear and intimidation. We sat together, looking out at the garden where she'd been volunteering with the facility's landscaping program. Her life had found meaning and joy again, just as mine had. The woman who'd sacrificed everything for my education was finally receiving the care and comfort she deserved. "I want you to know something," my mother said softly. "Even during the worst times, when we were living in that motel, and I was so sick, I never doubted that you'd find your way through. You have something inside you that can't be broken, no matter what anyone does to you." She was right about that, too. Marcus had tried to break my spirit, my confidence, and my faith in justice. He'd succeeded temporarily. But what he'd actually done was burn away everything that wasn't essential, leaving only the core strength that no one could touch. The journey from fired waitress to hotel executive had taught me lessons I never could have learned any other way. I understood what it felt like to have nothing, which made me cherish what I'd built. I knew how it felt to be powerless, which made me use power responsibly. I'd experienced the devastation of betrayal, which made me value loyalty and integrity above everything else. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the people who try to destroy you are actually preparing you for something greater than you ever imagined possible. As I drove back to the hotel that evening, I thought about all of you who've been listening to this story. Maybe you're facing your own Marcus Richardson right now. Maybe someone in your life is trying to convince you that you don't belong, that your dreams are unrealistic, that you should accept whatever crumbs they're willing to offer. If that's you, I want you to know something. They're wrong. Not just wrong about your limitations, but wrong about how the world works. Merit matters. Integrity matters. Treating people with dignity and respect matters. And sometimes, the people who try to keep you down end up providing exactly the motivation you need to rise higher than they ever could. The Grand Crest Hotel continues to thrive today. We've become a model for ethical hospitality management, proving that businesses succeed when they prioritize people over profits and principles over personal gain. And me? I'm exactly where I belong. Not because someone gave me permission to be here, but because I built this place through my own vision, determination, and refusal to accept other people's limitations on my potential. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and let me know in the comments about a time when someone underestimated you. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their current struggles might be preparing them for something extraordinary. And subscribe, because I've got more stories about people who refuse to stay where others tried to put them. Remember, your worth isn't determined by people who can't see your value. Your potential isn't limited by people who can't imagine your success. And your future isn't controlled by people who want to keep you small. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's building something so beautiful and successful that the people who tried to destroy you become completely irrelevant to your story. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.